Next presenter is Lucas, and talking about astrobiology, whether or not it can transcend biology itself. So Lucas, you are up.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to say a big thank you to Kelly for all the hard work, and of course for the great foresight, which I'm sure was deep wisdom on his part, of putting my talk after that last session, because I think there's a good bit of overlap here in the things that I want to talk about. I also want to give a quick apology. I'm going to have to duck out after my talk, but I hope to be back by the end of the session. I have other responsibilities that I need to check in on. But my talk is going to be, Can Astrobiology Transcend Biology? And it was somewhat motivated by this, I think, very common notion that we hit a certain level of intelligence and are no longer affected by natural selection. And therefore, when we are predicting the future of humans as a species, it will look radically different than the past of humans as a species. So a quick run through, I did this picture of ways that we can look at evolution. Do we think of the development of humans and our relationship to other species as a point on a line, as a branch on a tree, usually the highest branch on a tree, or as one tiny branch on a very bushy shrub? By the way, the little red dot there in the diagram on the right, that is mammals. So we usually think of biological diversity in a very different way, but, and oh, no, sorry, that's not mammals, that's animals. That's all animals. The green one is all plants. So humans are viewed very differently on such a tree. And I mentioned this idea of shifting population curves, borrowed this diagram from Stephen Jay Gould in Full House. And I wanted to say that I think variation is as important as maxima and minima. So it's not just who is most intelligent, and it's not that the whole species gets more intelligent, but the range of intelligence will change, and there will be benefits for the species and benefits for individuals, and the same for morality. So the population structure and the number of populations matter. If you're going someplace that's 40 light years away, chances are you're not going to be mixing in terms of a population that interbreeds in the way that human populations all currently interbreed. And so that's going to have a radical effect on how we think of ourselves as a group and what our diversity is. So I was sort of objecting to this Kardashev scale and singularity type projection into the future. That seems very linear to me. Sort of objecting to this very common, we all know what it means to be more evolved or less evolved. But as an evolutionary biologist, I have to say, I find that very problematic. There's an interesting definition some biologists buy, I don't, that you can be more evolved. I think there's just how much time you have, but you can have undergone more selective pressure, but that doesn't make you better or more mature in any predictable way. And so the equation of evolved with mature, as is done in Star Trek, is very problematic biologically. This issue of labor and variation within the population, and what happens when some parts of the population do more labor and other parts of the population reap more benefits, is a really interesting question and does have evolutionary implications. And then just highlighting this question, what do we think that we need to improve? The Star Trek Imaginary says it's our technology and our knowledge base, and morality will follow. The Space Resources Imaginary says if we just increase our autonomy, productivity, and then technology and morality will follow. The Planetary Protection Imaginary says if we improve our laws and regulations, which has a lot of assumptions about the structure of government, that things will get better. And so I just want to prompt people with utopian literature that asks what happens if we change our population structure, if that's what we want to change. Books you can read. That's my summary.
Kelly, you're muted.
Yeah, okay. Natalie, you first.
Thank you very much. I was just going to say that I enjoyed that presentation very much and that I agree with you. This idea of linearity, for example, as you find in Star Trek, it's also something that I talk about in my presentation and that I'm also going to talk a bit about tomorrow. There is this idea that if you look at the way that evolution is occurring, that you can find some kind of directionality there. And so that's something that you see, for example, in Star Trek, then like when they go to a different planet, then the idea is there that sometimes that the people on a certain planet would be in an agricultural stage or in a hunter-gatherer stage. And well, that is problematic in many ways because first of all, it takes like a certain type of natural history as universal for any other planet. And I think that is problematic, and I agree with you there.
Thank you.
Okay, Gregor.
Hi, I'm greatly interested in what will happen when the human species starts to diverge on different planets and the time scale on which this will happen. I'm wondering if evolutionary biologists have any rules of thumb or even equations for addressing if you take a population and split it in half and they're reproductively isolated, how many generations does it take before they can't interbreed?
Effective oh, sorry, ask that again?
Well, let's say you take a population and you split it in half and they're reproductively isolated from one another and they go, they diverge according to the local circumstances of their geochemistry and whatnot. How many generations do evolutionary biologists have any general rules of thumb or equations for predicting how many generations it would take before those populations cannot interbreed?
So it's actually very easy. All you need is genetic engineering or contingency for them not to interbreed pretty much immediately. But if you want the population genetic answer of how long it would take before we would expect that they would basically, that they should be treated as different species, we generally say a number of generations equal to the effective population of the group. So obviously, if you have two populations of 7 billion, it's going to be a long time. But if you take a population of, say, 100 colonists, effective population is not quite the same as population. It's not unreasonable that we could see some pretty serious divergence in 100 years.
Yeah, I assume there'll be tremendous founder effects too from the small number of initial colonists on a world.
There certainly could be. I am interested in the ways that our population segregates who gets sent out into space, and who gets to reproduce. We don't ever talk about it because it's what I call a flaming torch issue. You don't study it because people come after you with flaming torches. But it is true that there is differential reproduction between different social groups, and that can shape things. Probably not that much right now because of just our population structure. But the farther we get away from each other, the more problematic that could be.
Thank you.
Okay, Jason.
Yeah, thanks for the talk, informative. I just wonder if you think due to enhancements of some kind, or let's say AI or these kinds of things, whether the traditional way in which we understand evolution might change, because the role of replication or reproduction or these kinds of pressures that are traditionally on populations just don't play the role that they once did.
Well, I mean, I'm of the school of biology that says artificial selection is just a form of natural selection. So it's not different rules. It's just sort of a different situation. We don't call the reproductive sorting of bees artificial selection, but we do call the reproductive sorting of, well, we don't call the reproductive sorting of bees by other bees artificial, but we do call the reproductive sorting of humans by other humans artificial. I think the definition is artificial. That said, I threw up RUR and Westworld because I do think we have the capability of creating another replicator that's some form of artificial intelligence that will have very little identification with us in terms of morals. And that, I think, will complicate, I don't know what you want to call it, a reverse symbiosis. It's not quite a speciation, but I do think that could make things interesting.
Thanks.
Okay, Neil?
Hey, there's a philosopher down at Mississippi State, John Bickel, who has been working on something that's just been really, really eye-opening and interesting to me, which is that the history of science is really mischaracterized. It's really incredibly contingent on the tools available, and that the tool availability itself, the instrumentation, is really just highly contingent on biological capacities, local circumstances, and so forth. So if you know, it's just very, very contingent that we developed an interferometer, and that determined the trajectory of all the future science. And I was wondering, in connection with that and with what you said, might there be such significant divergence after these splittings that we couldn't even have, a basic scientific communication anymore, that what we would consider science on planet A and planet B would just be so radically different, maybe there wouldn't be the possibility of meaningful communication?
Wow. I mean, I suppose that's a Tower of Babel question. There will always be overlap. I am accidentally also a theologian. So despite the fact that I don't believe in pure accuracy as a product of natural selection, insofar as I am an evolutionary biologist, I do actually have some hope that there is such a thing as universal science and universal communication that's possible through apprehension of reality. I just can't get there with evolutionary biology. Are we fallen enough that we will learn that we will fail to communicate with each other? Yes, we don't communicate with each other now, but we can always aspire, and I think there will always be commonalities.
Okay.
All right, Ted?
Lucas, I find it interesting that natural selection will trump and is more comprehensive and includes human plan artifice in reproduction. So when the transhumanists tell us that they're going to create super intelligence and through bio-nanotech are going to take control of the future evolution of the human race, do you applaud?
Mostly I ignore. I consider natural selection to be a logical consequence of variation and differential survival. It's like saying we're suddenly going to transcend logic, or we're going to transcend physicality. Sure, it's a possibility, but it's so far out of our ability to predict. I just don't even know what to do with it.
Jason, do you or Natalie have more comments, or you just forgot to put your hand down?
I forgot, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Does anybody else want to weigh in or have a comment or a question? Carlos, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. I've been having this chat with Kelly.
You muted yourself.
Sorry.
There you go.
Did I? I was trying to lower my hand. Yeah, I've been having this this chat with Kelly in the chat, and also for the past couple of years, about whether there's any trends and tendencies in evolution. And you see this popping up again and again, like from major transitions literature. You see it coming up in, like, I guess even the image you put up of Gould, his passive diffusion is a kind of trend, right? And so
maximal
yeah.
body size in let's see, maximal
Pope's
body
rule.
size in families has increased through time. It's the
Right.
only well-documented trend. I think there are trends and they can be observed empirically. There's just probably not that many of them.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense. I agree.
Felisa Smith did that work.
Yeah. Awesome. Let me see if I can lower my hand.
We actually had a conference on that topic last year in Arizona with Dan McShay et al. And it was really good. It's interesting to ask the question of if there are any logically necessary things that you get, maybe population density dependent things that you would expect in any evolving system.
What about like hierarchy, like nestedness? McShay talks about that a couple of times.
Yeah, I get really nervous about complexity and measures of complexity, and I'm not sure nestedness is all that much better. It's intuitively obvious, and anything that's intuitively obvious makes me really skeptical.
Good man.
No, I will add to that because it's intuitively obvious, it's an intriguing thing to think about. But I think putting your finger, like, if you're going to talk about complexity trends, you really should be able to have a working definition of what complexity is that makes sense. And that's the basic hurdle that people encounter very quickly. So
Eugene Koonin has something on the necessary complexification of genomes. I don't know enough math, just like I don't know enough math to follow Sarah Walker, but that's where I would look.
Okay.
Although the last thing on that, like McShay's point on this is, just pick a idea of complexity and be consistent. The problem is that we keep mixing and matching.
Well, we keep mixing and matching because you need to if you want to get the timescales people want to work on.
Yep.
All right, John, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just the other problem with complexity is that as soon as we start talking about it, we almost instantly begin talking about more and less complex. And we head back into that linear kind of way of thinking about things instead of thinking about there are different types of complexity. And we turn it into this scale, and so then we're out of that ability to think in terms of rearranging.
And I really want to encourage people to think about how a population might benefit from having more and less intelligent members, and more and less moral members. It's somewhat unfortunate from a philosophical standpoint, but biologically, that's the way populations work. And so you want a strategy for the population and not just a strategy for individuals. And this idea that the whole population is individuals that are all getting smarter and all getting more moral, it just doesn't seem to have a whole lot of precedent in my mind.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, great.